For the month of June, I've actually worked on a ton of different things, from using World Dissolver and see-through objects just so I could have like a really neat effect when my NPCs die, to working with Affinity Designer and learning how to use it for the first time. So I can use it for card skills, and this will be used every time a new character goes on a brand new run, to working on a brand new scene using Gaia. There's actually a ton of different things that happen this month, and I'm happy to share them with you. So let's get started. First, I want to talk about World Dissolver. I'm going to explain what it is, how it works, and what I managed to do with it. World Dissolver lets you do a variety of see-through visual effect shaders, and one of the effects I already use is a cylinder between the camera and the player. So whenever a tree or something obstructs the vision, the camera will always have a clear view of the player. However, I'm interested in another feature of this tool that lets you create dissolving effects. I should be able to create an effect that lets you dissolve the character, and I want to use these effects to make my NPCs dissolve whenever they die. Now, how do we implement this? World Dissolver needs three things for it to function: a mask component that will mask the object for the effect, a World Dissolve component that acts as the controller for the effect, and the shader that will perform the special effect. Mask components need to be registered with World Dissolver, and materials also need to be registered with World Dissolver. What I did was pretty simple. I would spawn an empty game object which would act as my mask. Whenever an NPC died, the mask object would spawn, which would create this cool dissolving effect. On my first iteration, however, the mask would spawn, but it would create a white mask effect. I believe this was due to incorrect shader settings that I may have had on the mask. Then I had a weird issue with my death mask game object replaying every time the player got close due to a trigger collider. Finally, I had a working version with the correct mask and effect applied. So one thing that I already knew was going to be a challenge was going to be the skill system. And that's because you have to figure out, oh, when will the player be able to choose their skills? And even more so, because I'm making it as a card-based system, I want to let the player choose the skills that they want to do. Are these skills going to be done at the start of the run, at the end of the run, sometime during the run? Are they going to get achievements while they're doing the run, which kind of benefits them towards the skill system? Is it for attack bonuses, crit bonuses, speed, abilities, There's a lot of different things to consider. But before we get to that point, we also need to figure out what kind of an interface the player is going to interact with, which is when I chose the card-based system. Now, if you've seen the previous videos, you've seen that I've kind of made like this really unusual purple monstrosity that I was using as my rough draft. And it got me as far as like getting me the idea of how it's going to be used, but I can't actually use that. So I started to talk with Nick, my artist, and I started talking with him about like what can I do so I could kind of make my own cards. And he was telling me about this tool known as Affinity Designer, and he's told me about this tool before, but I've never really used it. Now, he said you're going to have a much easier time with it, and after listening to him and going through a few lessons with him and watching a few YouTube tutorials, it really made a big difference. Now, if you've never used Affinity Designer before, it's basically like Adobe Illustrator. It's a vector painting tool software. So it's really nice and really easy to use, and honestly I like it more than Adobe Illustrator. But last time I used Illustrator was like 10 years ago, so I don't know how it is right now. Anyway, Affinity Designer, super cool, super good to use, and I use that in conjunction with another tool known as PureRef. With PureRef, it lets you grab images from the internet, and then now you have references that you can use whenever you need to for a specific topic. Now, in my case, that topic was, a bow and a house. So that's what I currently have inside the game. After grabbing a couple of these and then just tossing them into Affinity Designer, I was able to come up with something pretty nice and something that I really liked. Afterwards, I talked with Nick a bit about the cards. He made the original card designs and the layout and template. I modified them a bit so I could kind of like import them in the game, and it kind of works with the bow. And after playing around with some of the designs and talking with Nick, I have something that I'm actually relatively happy with. And honestly, I'm just a little concerned about, not having an artistic background, that if I can actually make a very consistent style. But luckily, you know, I figured that if it really goes terrible, you know, Nick will have no choice and he'll just kind of volunteer to help me fix all this. And then by volunteer, I mean he'll just do it himself. So with all that said, we're on to the final piece, the level design. So here's the thing. Right now in the project, we have a starting level and we have the village level. So the premise of the game is that, you know, the starting level or levels, I haven't decided yet, is going to be more of like tutorial levels, just to kind of get a feel for the game. Then when you get to the village, you get some context of the world and the story, and that's going to act as your home base as you keep going out and doing runs. But right now I only have those 2 levels, so I need to make more levels so you can actually start to do more runs. I use the software known as GAEA, and it's not Unity's GAEA, it's a completely different one. It's one used to build out terrains. It's a website called Quadspinner, and it's been used for like a lot of popular tools before, like I think it's been used for Alan Wake and I think Avatar as well. And there's like a bunch of other references that they have on their website too. Anyway, what this tool does, if you're not familiar with it, is it lets you kind of pick out nodes of individual objects. So you might have a node of like mountains, and then you want to add cracks in it, and then you want to add snowy terrain and then rivers through it, and it'll add the cracks and smooth effects, and you can plant different seeds in this tool that will generate new types of terrain for it, so that it still looks like a mountain, but it's going to have the cracks and whatnot, or it's going to have like a big enough lane so that like a river could be going through it. Or if you want to make a volcano, you can do that too. You can top out the mountain, and then now you can make like a little lake on top of the volcano, just for the visual aspect of it. And then now you can do it in Unity and just fill out the rest of the terrain. Now, once you have this going, got this into Unity using Unity's terrain tools, you export it through GAEA using the height map and the splat map. The height map is so that Unity can auto pick it up and then generate the exact copy of what you're using. And the splat map I can use to kind of pre-populate all the terrain textures that I need, so it has the appropriate copy that I need. After I did that, you know, I imported a couple different textures into the project, which worked out pretty nice. However, you know, it's still very different from the rest of the game. So, you know, there's still like a lot more work that needs to be done. But I pulled out a few other terrain textures that I found from the asset store and from fab.com, so I can kind of come up with something kind of colorful, something that you know, looks a little better. I think for the next month, I'm going to try to figure out how I want the player to interact with the scene a little bit once they get into the village. I have this idea that they're exploring the village and then somebody is there to meet them somehow, and then kind of fill them in on like, oh, here's what's happening, here's what used to happen, and, you know, give them some purpose in the village. And then apart from that, probably do a bit more level design, because I need the world more defined. If you like this type of content, appreciate it if you give it a like and subscribe. Until then, I'll see you in the next one. Have a good one, guys.